The day an HOA president called my private lake a health hazard, she stood in front of a packed room, jabbed her finger at a blown-up photo she'd taken on my land without permission, and announced she was going to fix it with chemicals. And I remember thinking, "Lady, you have no idea what you're about to poison." She thought she was killing a few fish and shutting down the view from her back deck. What she actually did was put 162 families on bottled water, blow up her own board, and turn herself into the kind of warning story people tell at county meetings for years. My name's Owen Hadley. I'm 47 and I work in water treatment for a regional utility company about half an hour west of Raleigh, North Carolina. I've spent most of my adult life testing source water, designing filtration systems, and making sure what comes out of a tap doesn't make somebody sick. Water has a way of telling on people, that's what I've learned. It remembers everything, it carries everything. And if you disrespect how it moves, it'll make a fool out of you sooner or later. Back in 2017, I bought 36 acres at the north end of what later became Meadow Glen Estates. It was old tobacco land, half woods, half rolling field with a creek called Otter Branch cutting through it and widening into a 5-acre spring-fed lake down in a shallow valley. The lake was the reason I bought the place. Cold, clear water, limestone springs, feeding in from below bluegill hanging in the shadows even in the middle of summer. The kind of water that makes a man breathe slower just looking at it. I built a modest house up on the hill, a workshop out back, a cedar dock on the shore, and over a couple seasons I stocked the lake myself, bass, crappie, catfish, trout. Most weekends you could find me on that dock with a rod in one hand and a beer in the other, not bothering anybody. Then the subdivision came. A developer bought the acreage south and east of me, carved it into lots. And by 2021, Meadow Glen had everything. Those places always have a clubhouse, a pool, neat little mailboxes and covenants thick enough to stop a bullet. 162 homes wrapped around two sides of my land, and a lot of those back decks looked straight over my water. The important detail, the one that mattered more than any of them knew, was this. Meadow Glen wasn't on city water. Every one of those homes depended on private wells drilled into the same limestone groundwater system that fed the springs on my property. My lake wasn't just sitting there like a decorative pond. It was tied into the same underground water source their kitchen showers and baby bottles depended on. I knew that because I'd read the survey when I bought the place. And because this is literally what I do for a living. The HOA president was a woman named Vivian Schaefer, mid-50s, former pharmaceutical sales rep, perfect teeth, perfect posture, always dressed like she was 5 minutes from posing for a brochure. She had that polished smile people mistake for warmth until they notice it never reaches the eyes. She got elected on talk about community standards and aesthetic excellence, and from then on she ran those board meetings like cross-examinations. Everybody in Meadow Glen seemed half scared of her, half exhausted by her. I wasn't in her HOA. My land had never been folded into the subdivision, never signed into their rules, never belonged to them in any way. But that never seemed to matter to Vivian. The first time she mentioned my lake, she called it that eyesore with the fishing poles. The second time, it was a liability. By the third time, it was a problem that needed to be addressed. It started like a lot of bad power plays do, with something just reasonable enough to sound sane. In the fall of 2023, she sent me a letter saying my lake was attracting Canada geese, and those geese were wandering into Meadow Glen and leaving droppings on sidewalks and lawns. She suggested motion sprinklers, reflective tape, maybe even a border collie service. I read it, laughed once, folded it, and set it aside. Geese do not care about HOA letterhead, and they sure don't operate on community standards. A couple weeks later, I found a laminated sign staked near the shore that read, "No Fishing Zone HOA Resolution, 2023-14, on my land." I pulled it up, leaned it against my mailbox, and left a note telling them they had no authority there. 3 days later, there were 4 more signs. One was bolted to my dock post, which meant somebody had come down. My path stepped onto my dock and drilled into wood I'd cut with my own hands. That one made my jaw lock. I sent a certified letter to the whole board with a copy of my deed, my survey, and a plain statement that they were trespassing and needed to stop. Vivian wrote back on HOA stationery, all smooth and smug, saying that while my property may not fall within formal covenant boundaries, the lake had significant visual and ecological impact on the Meadow Glen community. and the board had a moral obligation to regulate activity affecting community quality of life. Then she fined me $250. I pinned that letter on the wall of my workshop, right beside one of my water quality charts. Funny thing, when you work in water long enough, you start to appreciate the difference between science and somebody with a printer. What really stuck in my head wasn't the fine, though. It was the last line of the letter. She said the board was exploring further measures. That kind of phrase always bothers me. In my experience, people who say further measures have already decided what they're going to do. They just want the paperwork to look clean when they do it. In January of 2024, she called an emergency board meeting. A retired science teacher in the subdivision named Reggie Sullivan, decent man, one of the few people over there with a functioning conscience, texted me afterward and sent me photos of the meeting minutes. Vivian had brought in a so-called environmental consultant, a man named Harold Finn. I looked him up. He had a marketing PhD from some online outfit and ran a pest control company out of a strip mall. Mosquito fogging, ant treatment, that kind of thing. Not water science, not ecology, not groundwater, nothing. According to the minutes, he told the board my stocked lake created nuisance wildlife, mosquito risks, and declining water quality, and he recommended chemical remediation to return the lake to a more natural state. That's a fancy phrase for kill the fish. The motion passed 5-2. Reggie voted no. Another board member, Patrice Owens, voted no too. Vivian steamrolled both of them. The minute I found out, I wrote the board again. I laid it all out. The spring-fed system, the groundwater link, the state permit requirements, the need for landowner consent, the fact that dumping chemicals into that lake could affect the same aquifer feeding every well in Meadow Glen. I attached surveys, diagrams, regulatory summaries, all of it. I made it so simple a tired high schooler could have followed it. 2 weeks later, Vivian sent back a one-paragraph reply saying they appreciated my input and had forwarded my concerns to their consultant. That was the moment I stopped thinking this was a petty HOA fight and started treating it like a real threat. I bought 4 trail cameras and mounted them around the lake, one on the dock, one on a sycamore by the eastern bank, one covering the access path from Meadow Glen, one near the spring inlet. They uploaded wirelessly with timestamps and GPS tags. Then I waited. Spring came early that year. The dogwood started blooming. The lake got that soft green shimmer it always gets when the water warms, and for a minute I almost thought maybe common sense had won. Then one Tuesday morning in April, I walked down to the shore and stopped cold. The water had a faint blue-green cast to it too, even too flat wrong, in a way I felt before I fully understood it. Then I smelled it, sharp metallic like wet pennies in old pipes. Copper sulfate. I knew that smell from work, and I knew it well enough to feel my stomach drop before I even knelt at the edge. I sampled the lake right away, surface depth spring inlet. Then I pulled the camera footage. Camera 3 showed everything. At 2:14 in the morning, a white pickup rolled up along the Meadow Glen side. 2 men got out in dark clothes and caps. They hauled heavy bags down to the bank, slit them open, and dumped the contents straight into the lake for nearly 40 minutes. The plate on the truck traced back to Pinnacle Pest Solutions, Harold Finn's company. The lab results came back 2 days later. Surface concentration, 14 parts per million. Safe for aquatic life is about 1/10 of 1. My lake wasn't treated, it was poisoned. Worse than that, the spring inlet sample showed copper already moving through the groundwater. That was the twist of the knife right there. Vivian thought she was attacking me. What she'd really done was aim a chemical weapon straight back at her own neighborhood. I called a water rights attorney in Raleigh named Faye Prescott. Told her everything. She listened, then said, "Don't touch anything, and after that we need the state involved now." Within 48 hours, the state environmental people were out there. Dr. Anita Rojas, senior scientist, calm as stone, came with a tech sampling gear and the sort of expression professionals get when they already know this is bad, but are waiting to find out how bad. She tested the lake, the springs, the downstream flow, and had monitoring wells drilled near the property line. The results confirmed exactly what I'd warned them about. The copper had entered groundwater and was moving south and east, straight toward Meadow Glen's wells. By Friday, every household in that subdivision got a notice: do not drink the water. Bottled water stations went up at the clubhouse. A mobile testing unit rolled in. Parents started calling pediatricians. Elderly folks started asking if they'd already been drinking contamination for days. The woman who'd spent months shouting that my lake was the danger had created an actual public health crisis in her own backyard. And here's the truth. I didn't feel triumphant when that advisory hit. I wanted accountability, sure, but I didn't want scared families hauling cases of bottled water because one woman couldn't stand the sight of a fishing rod from her deck. That part sat heavy on me. Innocent people always pay first when arrogance gets in bed with authority. So I got organized. I built the file like my life depended on it. Every camera clip, every lab report, every letter, every certified mail receipt, every photo of those stupid signs, every set of meeting minutes, every public record tied to Finn and his fake credentials. Then Faye filed suit. We named Vivian the HOA, Harold Finn, and Pinnacle Pest Solutions. Trespass, contamination, negligence, misuse of HOA funds, destruction of property, all of it. Then came the piece that really buried her. Through county records, we found an email Vivian had sent to the county health officer 2 weeks before the poisoning. She'd asked whether chemical treatment of a nuisance pond required notice or permits. The officer wrote back with a full list: state permit, landowner consent, aquifer review, all of it. And Vivian replied, "Thank you. We'll handle it internally." She knew. She had been warned by me, by the county, by Reggie, by Patrice, and she did it anyway. That's the thing that still gets under my skin. Being wrong is human. Refusing to listen when 4 different doors open in front of you, that's a choice. The county commissioner meeting in May was packed wall to wall, reporters, homeowners, neighbors, cameras, everybody breathing the same hot room air. I sat in the 3rd row with Faye on one side and Reggie on the other. Vivian sat across the room in a navy blazer with her lawyer still looking polished, still trying to wear authority like perfume. When I got to the microphone, I kept my voice level. I explained the lake, the springs, the groundwater, the poisoning, the test results. Then I played part of the trail camera audio so the room could hear those bags tearing open in the dark powder hitting water at 2 in the morning. You could feel the air change. Then a father from Meadow Glen got up and said his wife had been mixing baby formula with tap water before the advisory went out. His voice shook so hard I thought he might stop talking altogether. He didn't. After him, more homeowners stood up, angry, scared, tired. Vivian's lawyer tried to spin it as an unfortunate incident caused by an independent contractor. Commissioner Janet Liu cut him off mid-sentence and said, plain as a hammer, "We've seen the meeting minutes. The board authorized this." That silence afterwards, I've never heard anything louder. Once the full state report landed, it was over in any way that mattered. 11 wells contaminated, 2 above the federal limit, cleanup estimated in the hundreds of thousands, no permit, no consent, no legal defense worth a damn. Criminal charges followed. Vivian got hauled into court. The board removed her. Reggie stepped in. The HOA's insurer eventually paid out enough to cover lake cleanup, aquifer monitoring, my losses, legal fees. Vivian had to sell her house to cover her personal share. Harold Finn lost his license. His company folded. She ended up banned from serving on an HOA board in North Carolina ever again. The lake took time. Water always does. Clearwater Environmental treated it through the summer. By fall, copper levels dropped below state limits. By winter, the water was clear enough to see hope in it again. The next spring, I restocked the fish. Bass, crappie, catfish, trout. Same as before. The heron came back in October. The bullfrogs started up again when the weather warmed. One evening, I heard a barred owl call from the same sycamore where one of my cameras had hung, and I just sat there listening until the sound faded into crickets and moving water. Reggie became HOA, president, unopposed. His first move was repealing Vivian's ridiculous fishing resolution and sending me a written apology on behalf of the community. His second was creating a liaison position so nobody on that board could ever again pretend an adjacent landowner didn't exist. Patrice took the job. About a year later, the filters came off the Meadow Glen homes. The well test came back clean. Kids were drinking from kitchen taps again. The families who'd been scared got to exhale. And one Saturday, Reggie came down to my dock with a rod he'd bought at a yard sale and asked me to teach him how to fish. He was awful at first, truly awful. But we sat there in the sunset anyway, lines in the water, not saying much, and after a while he looked out over the lake and said, "I guess the real problem was she never stopped to ask what the water was connected to." That stuck with me, because that's not just about water. That's about power, about ego, about what happens when somebody gets a clipboard, a title, a room full of people too tired to push back, and starts making decisions they do not understand. Water is always connected to something. So are communities. So is trust. Poison one part, and the damage travels farther than you planned. These days I still fish every Saturday morning. Same dock, same coffee, same slow cast into water that finally looks like itself again. Sometimes a clean splash breaks the surface near the far bank, and the rings spread out wide and quiet like nothing bad ever happened there. But I know better. Water forgives slowly. And so do people. The last I heard, Vivian had moved out of Meadow Glen for good. Her old house sold at a loss. Reggie jokes that the neighborhood has been calmer ever since, which is his nice way of saying nobody misses her. And I'll admit it, there was one moment that felt like justice. Not the court date, not the settlement check, not the headlines. It was the first morning I saw a bass break the surface again in that restored lake, sharp and bright in the sunrise, like the water itself was telling me it had survived her.
So let me ask you this. When somebody with authority ignores every warning, hurts innocent people, and then try to call it an accident, where do you draw the line between a mistake and something unforgivable? And if you ever dealt with an HOA, a board, or any small-time ruler whose dog power matters more than understanding, tell me your story. I really want to hear where you think your style should started and where it should ended.